Bergeville?
Senator, I would have followed binding precedent.
You're not answering my question. Would you have reached the same conclusion?
Senator, the conclusions that the two precedents reached were potentially in conflict, and I would have to follow the precedent that...
So you can't tell us at this point whether you would have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell. So let me ask you about the Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence, affirming a constitutional right to be intimate among same-sex couples.
Adam Schiff thought he had him cornered. But this Trump nominee flipped the script so fast it left the entire room stunned and silence waiting for Schiff's next word. Every trap question dodged, every gotcha moment shut down. This is what happens when preparation meets desperation. And trust me, you're going to want to hear this.
Textualist. So let me ask you, the Emoluments Clause provides that no person holding public office shall accept any present of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state. Do you believe the language in the Emoluments Clause that says any present of any kind, whatever, means any present of any kind, whatever?
Senator, you are quoting the text of the Emoluments Clause, and I cannot dispute with the text of the Emoluments Clause.
So it would apply to any present, including an airplane?
It would apply to the president, I believe, your Senator.
And I take it as an originalist, you would accept that the founders would have never subscribed to the idea that a president in their time could have accepted a multi-hundred-million-dollar gift from a foreign state.
Senator, the premise of your question implicates live issues in the public and pursuant to the canons of judicial ethics.
Well, let me just ask you, would the founders have believed that if a president received 100 camels from a foreign state, that was an emolument?
Senator, it's difficult to answer that question in the...
Is it, though, as an originalist? Isn't it pretty simple? You've got the clear language of the Constitution.
Senator, one has to look at the language, but also the history surrounding the Emoluments Clause in order to discern.
I am looking at the history. Let me move on to another question. As an originalist, do you believe that the Obergefell versus Hodges decision affirming constitutional right to same-sex marriage, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, Obergefell versus Hodges is binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
I'm aware of that. Do you believe it was wrongly decided?
Senator, as a circuit judge, I would be bound to follow
I understand that, but that's not a response to my question. Had you been on the Court of Appeals prior to that decision, would you have decided the case that way?
Senator, prior to Obergefell versus Hodges, there was a prior Supreme Court case addressing the issue, and I would have followed that case.
Well, would you have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell?
Senator, I would have followed binding precedent.
You're not answering my question. Would you have reached the same conclusion?
Senator, the conclusions that the two precedents reached were potentially in conflict, and I would have to follow the precedent that...
So you can't tell us at this point whether you would have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell. So let me ask you about the Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence, affirming a constitutional right to be intimate among same-sex couples. Do you believe that was wrongly decided?
Senator, Lawrence versus Texas is a binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
Again, I'm aware of that, but I'm asking you whether you believe that was rightly decided or wrongly decided.
Senator, you're asking about my personal views?
No, I'm asking you about your legal views. I'm asking about your legal views. Let me ask you about another case. Do you believe that Loving versus Virginia, which affirmed an interracial couple's right to marry, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, my wife and I are an interracial couple, and so if that case were wrongly decided, I would be in big trouble.
Okay, so you do agree with the reasoning of that case, and you're willing to say that. I appreciate that. But you're unwilling to say that you agree that Obergefell and Lawrence were correctly decided. Why is that?
Senator, again, those decisions are binding precedent of the Supreme Court, and I would be bound to follow.
No, I'm aware of that. So is Loving. And you're willing to tell us that you believe Loving was correctly decided, but you're not willing to say the other decisions were correctly decided. That seems less originalist and more situational. Let me ask you this about your role in the brief in Moore versus Harper. This was a case involving The discredited independent state legislature theory, which would allow a state legislature, even in the absence of a governor's signature, to effectively overturn an election. Do you believe that the Supreme Court wrongly decided Moore v. Harper when it rejected your view?
Senator, again, Moore v. Harper is binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, no, I get that, but you're still not answering my question, so let me ask you a different way. If a state legislature decided after an election to pass a bill, even in the absence of a governor signing it, to throw out absentee ballots that were mailed prior to the election but arrived after the election, would it be your view that a state Supreme Court or federal court would have to allow the legislature to overturn the election, would be powerless to correct that effort to overturn a free and fair election?
Senator, Moore versus Harper states that state courts can review what the state legislatures have passed as a matter of the Constitution.
No, I'm aware of that. And my concern, though...
Adam Schiff's obsession with hypotheticals? He starts off talking about camels and airplanes. He's trying to make originalism look ridiculous. But here's the thing Schiff doesn't want you to understand. Originalism isn't about being stuck in 1789. It's about the rule of law. It's about the idea that words actually mean something and that judges shouldn't just make up the rules as they go. Mr. Chung did exactly what a judge is supposed to do. He stayed in his lane. He told Schiff, "Look, I'm a circuit judge. I follow binding precedent. That is the most basic, fundamental part of our legal system." But Schiff doesn't want a judge who follows the law. He wants a judge who will give him a political soundbite. And that's when it got nasty. Schiff starts dragging out Oberfell and Lawrence, trying to force Chung to criticize the Supreme Court. Why? So he can go on cable news tonight and call him a threat to democracy. It's the same old script every single time. But the moment where Schiff really lost the room was the Loving versus Virginia question. He thought he was being so clever. He thought if I ask him about interracial marriage, he'll have to either denounce originalism or look like a bigot. And then Chung just drops the hammer. He mentions his wife. He mentions his own life. He basically says, "Senator, this isn't an abstract law school debate for me. This is my family." You could see the air just leave Schiff's lungs in that moment. He had nowhere to go. So what does Schiff do? He pivots to the independent state legislature theory. He tries to make it sound like Chung is going to personally overturn elections. It's fear-mongering 101. Schiff claims he's worried about narrowing rights, but what he's actually worried about is a judge who won't be a rubber stamp for his political agenda. Bottom line, Mr. Chung showed us what judicial restraint looks like. He showed us that you can be principled, respectful, and still refuse to bow down to a bully in a suit. Adam Schiff tried to set a trap, but ended up being the one who looked like he didn't understand how the judiciary actually works. What do you guys think? Was Schiff out of line, or was Chung being too evasive? I think we know the answer to that one. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and let's keep the conversation going. I'll see you in the next one.